Why did three black SUVs make her freeze in the middle of changing brake pads? The wrench slipped from her hand, clanging against the concrete like a warning bell. For 8 years, Pine Ridge had been her sanctuary, her cover, her fiction. The grease under her fingernails was the disguise. Nobody knew the scar on her jawline came from shrapnel. Nobody guessed the woman who patched rusted pickup trucks could once steady her hands around explosives built to erase city blocks. Nobody, not even the people who waved at her from the post office, understood that Sergeant First Class Kate Morrison had been buried alive once, under rubble and guilt, and had chosen to stay buried. But the sound of military-grade engines cut through the illusion. That low, mechanical hum, the rhythm of convoys she thought she'd left behind. She knew it the way you know your own heartbeat. And suddenly, the mountains didn't feel safe anymore. Kate wiped her palms on her work shirt, forcing composure. Through the window she caught the formation: lead vehicle scanning, command vehicle steady in the middle, trail vehicle covering the rear. They moved like men trained to anticipate ambushes, windows blacked out, tires reinforced, the past rolling back into her present. When the vehicles stopped in her gravel lot, dust curling up around them like smoke, Kate knew the storm she'd always felt humming at the edge of her peace had finally arrived. 6 men stepped out, civilian clothes but not civilians. Every detail betrayed them, the way their eyes scanned angles and cover, the way their fingers adjusted jackets that hid sidearms. They had the gait of survivors. She'd seen it before. Operators, special forces, the kind of men you didn't call unless the world was bleeding. One walked forward, alone, compact frame, hard jaw, eyes that looked like they'd memorized too many funerals. He didn't bother with ID. He didn't have to. Kate recognized him the instant he stepped into view. Frank. Her voice was steady, but her chest clenched like a vice. Captain Frank Delacqua, her commanding officer, the man who had led her team through deserts and kill zones, the man she'd watched vanish behind fire and debris 8 years ago. She had buried him along with the others in memory if not in soil. And yet here he was, older, scarred, staring at her as if she were a ghost. "Been a while," he said, his tone carved with precision. 8 years, 2 months, 16 days. He'd counted. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Kate Morrison died that day, Frank. You're talking to Kate now, just a mechanic in Colorado." But his gaze dropped to the scar on her jawline, and she knew the lie didn't hold. The mechanic was a mask, and he'd come to rip it away. Peace is a fragile thing. She'd built hers piece by piece, bolting transmissions back together, hiking mountain trails with a pack that looked ordinary but wasn't, drinking coffee before dawn while the wind whispered against garage doors. But peace was never permanent. It was a ceasefire, and ceasefires always broke. Frank didn't waste time. "We've got operators dying. Syria, a weapons cache ringed with devices nobody can disarm. Every EOD team we've sent has been slaughtered. Someone out there is building bombs with signatures I've only ever seen in one place." Kate froze. She already knew. That precision, that artistry, the same engineering fingerprints she'd seen before the explosion that took her team. "Who's building them?" she asked, though the answer had already sunk like ice into her stomach. Frank's jaw tightened. "Someone who knows how you think, someone who studied your methods." He paused. "Kate, it's personal." Her chest felt heavy, her lungs tight. It wasn't the heat of Syria, but she could smell desert sand, cordite blood. She remembered the sound of her team's voices in their final seconds. Tommy Lou, Maria Santos, David Chen, Emma Rodriguez, their faces in a photograph that still lived inside her locker, 5 souls frozen in time. She'd been the only survivor, or so she thought. And now someone was using her own techniques to build traps meant to kill. Her inventions twisted into weapons, her fingerprints on bombs she never touched. "Why me, Frank?" she whispered. Her voice cracked, but not from fear, from exhaustion. She'd run far, hidden deep, convinced herself the war couldn't follow her here. But war doesn't care where you hide. Because, Frank said softly, you're the only one who ever beat devices like these. You're the only one who knows how to think beyond the manual. The team deploys in 18 hours. I need you. Kate turned away. The mountains blurred behind the window, pine trees swaying against blue sky. She wanted to say no. She wanted to stay in Pine Ridge, fix carburetors, walk into the diner and drink bad coffee while people nodded at her without knowing the truth. She wanted peace, even if it was pretend. But her body betrayed her. She felt it in her hands, the instinctive calculations, the phantom pressure of wires against her fingertips, the muscle memory of survival. Once you've lived with explosives, you can't unlearn them. Once you've disarmed death, the rhythm never leaves you. 2 hours, she said finally. Give me 2 hours to decide. Frank handed her a satellite phone. Decision window closes at 1600. After that, we move without you. But Kate, his voice dropped. This isn't just another mission. Whoever's building these devices, they knew your team, knew you. Someone sold you out in Afghanistan, and they're still alive. Her heart stalled. The SUVs pulled away, gravel crunching like gunfire. Dust hung in the air long after they vanished down the road. Kate stood in the silence of her garage, hands trembling though she tried to still them. For 8 years she'd kept her secret buried beneath engines and grease. But secrets don't stay buried. They tick. They wait. She descended into the workshop hidden beneath her garage floor, the sanctuary she built out of memory and obsession. Blast suits hung like ghosts. Tools gleamed under fluorescent light. On the workbench, a photograph of 6 soldiers stared back at her, frozen before betrayal. She unlocked the fireproof safe. Inside were files she hadn't touched in years. Names, reports, interrogations, paper trails that whispered of betrayal. She flipped pages with trembling hands until she saw it. Colonel Patricia Hawkins, her commanding officer at Fort Belvoir, the woman who trained her, who signed off on their deployment, the one person who had known every detail of how her team operated. And beside Hawkins' name, financial records, deposits, offshore accounts. The timeline lined up perfectly with the bombs that killed her team. Kate's throat burned. She had carried guilt for 8 years, believing she failed her people. But it wasn't failure, it was betrayal. Her phone buzzed. Frank again. Decision time. Deployment window closing. She stared at the files, at the betrayal carved into paper, at the scar she'd once told people was from a slipped wrench. Her fingers hovered over the phone. Then she typed, "I'm in, but we do this my way." Above ground, Pine Ridge carried on as if nothing had changed. A delivery truck rumbled down Main Street. Children rode bicycles past the general store. Mrs. Henderson's ancient Ford still sat in her garage with its half-changed brake pads. But underground, in the workshop where ghosts lived, Kate Morrison shed the mechanic's mask. Her hands moved over tools with the certainty of someone who had been preparing for this moment since the day she crawled out of the rubble. The past wasn't a memory, it was a device waiting to detonate, and she had just armed it. Why did the aircraft smell like the past? Kate sat strapped into the hard aluminum seat along the fuselage, knees tight, gear bag between her boots. She had been here before, airborne, surrounded by men who trusted each other without speaking, the cabin filled with the low roar of engines and the sharp tang of hydraulic fluid. But this time, she wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be fixing old Fords in Pine Ridge, counting the ridges in the Rockies instead of the rivets on military transports. Frank sat across from her, lit by the pale glow of a rugged tablet, reviewing data with the calm of someone who had lived too long in chaos. His team worked around him, green berets, each one moving like part of a single organism. No wasted motion, no words unless necessary, just trust born from nights where hesitation meant death. Kate recognized the rhythm instantly. It wasn't so different from her old team, and that recognition hurt more than she expected. She kept her eyes down, tracing the scarred steel floor beneath her boots, but then a voice cut through the engine noise. Familiar, too familiar. Didn't expect to see you again, Kate. Her head snapped up. He was sitting near the rear ramp, helmet off, eyes fixed on her with a mixture of disbelief and something deeper. He was older now, harder, a scar cut across his cheek, but there was no mistaking him. Tommy, she whispered. Sergeant First Class Tommy Lou, electronics genius. The kid who could trace wiring blindfolded, who once joked he could hear electricity sing. She had watched his body vanish in the explosion 8 years ago. She had carried him in her guilt, mourned him in silence, visited him in nightmares. But here he was, alive. Kate's breath caught in her throat. They told me you were gone. He gave a small, grim smile. Same for you. His eyes flicked to her scar, then back to her eyes. Guess we both got lucky. The words didn't fit. Lucky. That blast had buried them under fire and dust and silence. Lucky didn't cover crawling out alone, listening to voices fade into static. Lucky didn't cover 8 years of believing she'd failed them all. Her chest tightened. Who else? She forced out, though she already feared the answer. Tommy's smile faltered. He didn't need to say it, but Frank did. Just you and him, the others didn't make it. Kate nodded slowly, trying to control her breathing. Maria, David, Emma, their faces flashed like afterimages in her vision. Gone, confirmed. She pressed her palms together to keep her hands from shaking. Survivor's guilt had been her shadow for years, but now it had a twin. Tommy carried it too. And that changed everything. Tommy studied her, his gaze steady, searching. You really disappeared, huh? Pine Ridge. Mechanic, thought you were running from us. I was running from myself, she admitted, voice low. Thought if I buried Kate Morrison, maybe I'd bury the noise too. Noise doesn't bury easy, he said quietly. You know that. The truth sat between them like another passenger, heavy and undeniable. Frank cleared his throat, breaking the moment. Briefing. The team gathered around the display mounted on the bulkhead. Satellite imagery flickered across the screen. A compound hidden in the Syrian desert, nestled in rocky terrain like a scar on the earth. Target is here, Frank said, tapping the screen. Weapons cache. Intelligence confirms it's supplying multiple insurgent cells. Problem is, it's ringed with devices we can't touch. Every team we've sent gone. Kate leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the images shifted to thermal overlays, then schematics. Lines of heat, patterns of placement, too precise, too elegant. Her stomach dropped. Patricia Hawkins, she said aloud. The others glanced at her. Corporal Danny Walsh, the youngest, frowned. How can you be sure? Kate pointed at a cluster of wires in the photos. Look at the routing. See how she doubles back, creates redundant loops that look inefficient. That's her signature. She taught us that during advanced training, always disguise simplicity with complexity. She used to call it the art of war by misdirection. Tommy's jaw clenched. She's showing off. Frank gave a single nod. She's also selling. We believe the compound is being used as a live demonstration facility. Buyers are logging in remotely to watch her systems in action. These aren't just bombs, they're advertisements. Kate felt anger rise in her chest like heat. Hawkins hadn't just betrayed them. She had turned their deaths into marketing material. Every device wasn't just a weapon, it was proof of concept. Proof paid for in blood. What's the timeline? Asked Reeves, the communications man. 72 hours, Frank said. Before Syrian government forces sweep the area, we get one shot. Kate studied the map, her mind already running calculations. Blast radii, overlapping fields of fire, secondary detonators hidden in blind spots. The pattern was meticulous, but it revealed something Hawkins had forgotten. She wasn't fighting soldiers anymore. She was showing off for buyers, and vanity leaves cracks. Kate tapped a spot on the map. She's overcompensated, using twice the explosive she needs. That's not efficiency, it's theater. I can work with that. Frank studied her carefully. Are you ready? Really ready? Kate hesitated. Inside her, the mechanic and the soldier pulled in opposite directions. One wanted to stay in Pine Ridge, sip coffee, breathe mountain air. The other wanted to dismantle Hawkins piece by piece. Her voice came out steady. "I'm ready, but we don't play by her rules. We give her what she expects, right up until we don't." The men exchanged glances, some skeptical, some curious, but none argued. Kate leaned back, pulse steadying. For the first time in years, she felt a sliver of clarity. Hawkins thought she knew every move Kate could make, but Hawkins hadn't seen the woman who rebuilt herself with oil-stained hands and mountain silence. She hadn't seen Kate Morrison, mechanic. The engines roared louder as the aircraft began its descent. Through the small window, Kate saw the desert stretch out like an endless battlefield, different from Afghanistan. Same emptiness, same hunger. She thought of Pine Ridge, the garage, the smell of grease and coffee, the way small-town people trusted her without knowing why. She thought of the scar on her jawline, of the photograph in her locker, of the weight she carried in silence. And then she thought of Patricia Hawkins, standing somewhere inside that compound, teaching killers how to use her knowledge, cashing blood into offshore accounts. Kate's fists clenched. Peace had been an illusion. The storm had finally arrived, and she was done running. The transport hit turbulence, rattling hard. One of the Green Berets crossed himself. Another adjusted his rifle. Tommy caught her eye again, and this time his look wasn't disbelief. It was something closer to hope. For the first time in 8 years, Kate didn't look away. Why did the safe house smell like old war? Stone walls scarred by bullet marks, windows patched with bulletproof sheets, a living room stripped of furniture and rebuilt into a tactical nerve center, maps spread on folding tables, comms gear buzzing, weapons lined like shadows against the walls. Kate stood in the middle of it, boots planted on sand-stained tiles, and for a moment it felt like she had stepped back in time. The difference was the faces. These weren't her old team. These were Frank's Green Berets, men who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They trusted Frank, but her, she was the outsider, a civilian mechanic pulled back into a world she had sworn off. Only Tommy Lou broke the tension. He leaned over a comms rig, cables snaking like veins across the table. His hands moved with the same grace she remembered, fast and precise, as if electricity spoke to him in a language no one else could hear. But when he looked up, she saw the weight in his eyes. 8 years hadn't dulled it. He carried the same ghost she did. Frank spread reconnaissance photos across the table, grainy aerial shots of the compound, thermal images glowing with hidden signatures, notes scrawled in his sharp, efficient handwriting. "Peak activity is 400 to 600, Frank said. That's when new devices are loaded for distribution. If we hit, that's our window. Compound has 15 to 20 hostiles. No heavy weapons. Perimeter defenses here." He tapped the photos. "Overlapping, mathematically tight. Designed by someone who understands EOD doctrine." Kate leaned in, eyes narrowing at the patterns. She traced with her finger the arcs of explosive placement. Every blast radius overlapped perfectly, no gaps, no redundancies wasted. A defense system like a machine. It was beautiful, too beautiful. "Hawkins," Kate murmured. "This is her style, overly elegant, technically flawless, but she's forgotten one thing." The Berets turned to her. Danny Walsh, the youngest, asked the question out loud. "What's that?" Kate met his eyes. "War isn't math." The room was silent for a moment. Then Tommy gave a short, humorless laugh. "She's showing off again." Kate nodded. "She's treating this like a demonstration, not a defense. The placement is textbook perfect, but it ignores terrain. See here." She pointed to a ridge line on the topographical map. "Any real operator would place fewer charges here and rely on natural cover. Instead, she's doubled explosives to prove she can. It's theater." Frank folded his arms, watching her. "Can you exploit it?" Kate studied the patterns, her mind moving the way it always had, calculating, dismantling, seeing not just devices but intent. She saw Hawkins in every placement, every choice. Vanity, precision, the same precision that had once trained her hands. Yes, she said finally, but not with standard doctrine. If we approach like EOD, we die. If we breach like assault, we die. Hawkins built this to kill the predictable. We need the unpredictable. Reeves frowned. Unpredictable how? Kate's mouth tightened. We use civilian systems. Engines, power grids, water supply. The parts she didn't account for because she was too busy sculpting explosions. The berets exchanged skeptical glances. Soldiers trusted guns, not wrenches, but Frank's eyes never left her face. He knew her. He'd seen her solve the impossible before. Tommy leaned forward. You're saying we turn her own math against her? Kate gave a small nod. Exactly. She thinks in equations. I think in broken parts. She doesn't know what 8 years in Pine Ridge taught me. How to fix things that shouldn't work, how to bend tools into purposes they were never meant for. That's how we beat her. Silence again, heavier this time. Then Frank nodded once. Then that's the plan. The others didn't argue. They were green berets. They knew when to follow a leader's call, even if the leader wasn't wearing their patch. Still, Kate felt the weight of their stares. Outsider, ghost, a woman carrying shadows into their circle. She could feel their doubt pressing against her skin like heat. Later, when the briefing broke and the men prepared their gear, Kate stepped outside. The desert night stretched wide and silent. Stars spread like shrapnel across the sky. She leaned against the rough stone wall, closing her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Tommy found her there. He stood beside her in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. You've been carrying them all this time, haven't you? Her throat tightened. Every night, every time I close my eyes, Maria laughing, David humming while he worked, Emma rolling her eyes at my bad jokes, and you, she swallowed. You weren't supposed to be alive. I grieved you, Tommy. For 8 years, I thought. I know, he said softly, his voice cracked. I thought the same about you. Buried myself in private contracts, security jobs, pretending I didn't care, but I did. I carried you all too. She opened her eyes and looked at him. In his face she saw her own grief reflected back. Survivor's guilt mirrored. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything unspoken. I blamed myself, she whispered. Tommy shook his head. So did I, but it wasn't us, Kate, it was her. His voice hardened. Hawkins, she set us up, and now we get to end it. Kate nodded slowly. Together. For a moment, something eased in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. But the moment didn't last. From the safe house window, she could see the compound glowing faintly under starlight. Somewhere inside, Patricia Hawkins was preparing another demonstration. Another performance for buyers who didn't care about the bodies it cost. And tomorrow night, Kate would step back into the fire. Inside, the team finished their checks. Weapons oiled, radios tested, blades sharpened. But Kate's hands moved differently. She gathered her tools, her modified devices, wrenches, circuits, salvaged electronics turned into weapons of a different kind. Her arsenal wasn't guns. It was creativity sharpened into defiance. Frank approached, watching her work. I need to know something, he said quietly. When you face her, what will you do? Kate looked up. The question wasn't tactical, it was moral. She let the silence stretch before answering. I'm going to stop her, not for me, not for revenge, for them. She tapped the photo tucked inside her pack. Maria, David, Emma, the ones who never came home. Frank studied her for a long time, then nodded. That's enough. The desert wind howled through the cracks in the safe house walls, carrying the scent of dust and war. Kate felt it wrap around her like a shroud. She was no longer just Kate Morrison, mechanic of Pine Ridge. She was Catherine Morrison, bomb disposal specialist, student-turned-hunter, ghost-turned-storm. Tomorrow she would prove that even in betrayal, some lessons don't belong to the teacher. They belonged to the survivor. Why was the night always harder than the fight? The safe house hummed with low noise, radios crackling, gear being checked for the 10th time, men moving in patterns that were half practice, half prayer. For soldiers, the hours before a mission were the longest. Time slowed. Every second stretched thin with tension. The waiting killed more than the bullets. Kate sat against the cold stone wall, her rucksack open beside her. Tools spread out on the floor like a surgeon's instruments, pliers, cutters, wire spools, circuits. Not weapons in the conventional sense, but each one sharp in its own way. She worked with steady hands, though her chest felt tight. If she stopped moving, the weight of what lay ahead would crush her. Across the room, the Green Berets performed their quiet rituals. Walsh rubbed a rosary bead between calloused fingers. Reeves disassembled and reassembled his rifle in silence, as if proving it wouldn't betray him when it mattered. Mitchell wrote something in a small notebook, words meant for someone who might never see them. Frank simply sat with his back straight, eyes closed, conserving strength. Tommy wasn't with them. He was outside, stringing comms wire under the desert moonlight. Kate watched him through the cracked window, his silhouette crouched low, movements methodical. 8 years ago, she had thought his hands were gone forever. Now, seeing them steady in the glow of starlight, it felt unreal. Her fingers hesitated over a wire coil. She had to breathe. The desert night pressed against the walls. Wind carried sand like whispers. The sky was full of stars, cruelly indifferent. Kate closed her eyes and heard echoes, Maria laughing over coffee, Emma humming before a mission, David's voice sharp and steady. Ghosts crowded her, closer than ever. When she opened her eyes, Tommy had come back inside. He dropped his gear beside her and sat down, legs crossed. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "You still talk to them, don't you?" Kate stiffened. "Every night." Tommy nodded, looking down at his hands. "Me too." His voice broke. "I thought it was just me, thought I was going crazy. I hear Maria sometimes, her voice right behind me telling me to double-check circuits. I almost answer." Kate's throat tightened. "I do answer." Their eyes met, and in that silence the shame lifted just a fraction. They weren't crazy. They weren't alone. Tommy's gaze softened. "We didn't fail them, Kate. She did. Hawkins. Every ghost belongs to her." Kate wanted to believe him, but guilt was a stubborn thing. It clung to her like a second skin. She carried it too long to drop it now. Still, the weight felt lighter knowing Tommy shared it. He leaned closer. "Tomorrow, when we're inside, don't freeze. Don't let her control the field. Remember, you're the one she fears, not the other way around." Kate let out a shaky breath. "You sound so sure." "I'm not," Tommy admitted. "But we've both lived through what should have killed us. That has to count for something." Kate allowed herself the faintest smile. It felt foreign on her face, but real. The night stretched on. Hours bled together. Some of the men dozed in their gear, backs against walls, rifles cradled like children. Others stayed awake, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts they wouldn't share. Kate couldn't sleep. She lay on her back, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the breathing of soldiers who might not survive dawn. She remembered other nights, before her old missions, when Maria would tease her for packing, when Emma would toss her a protein bar and tell her to shut up and rest. She remembered the blast that ended it all, the silence after. Her hand drifted to her jawline, fingers brushing the scar. A reminder, a warning, a wound that never closed. She sat up again, restless, and stepped outside. The desert was vast and empty, the safe house a lone shadow in endless sand. The stars above were sharp enough to cut. She breathed in dry air, hoping it would calm her. Instead, it carried memories. She saw Hawkins's face in her mind, not as a traitor but as a teacher. The woman who once guided her hands, who drilled into her the art of making complexity look like chaos. Hawkins had been brilliant, ruthless, and Kate had admired her once. That admiration now tasted like poison. Frank's voice came from behind her. "Couldn't sleep." She turned. He stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching her with the calm of someone who had seen too many sleepless soldiers. Never could, Kate admitted. He nodded. You know the men don't trust easily, but they're watching you. Some of them already believe you'll get them through this. Kate shook her head. I'm not here to lead, I'm here to stop her. Frank stepped closer, his eyes steady on hers. You don't see it, do you? You've been carrying guilt so long you forgot what you really are. Hawkins doesn't just know your methods, she fears you. Because she knows you don't think like anyone else. That's why we need you. Not just your hands, your mind. His words hit deeper than she wanted to admit. She looked away, to the desert horizon where darkness clung to every dune. Fear doesn't win wars, Frank. No, he said softly, but belief does. He left her with that, stepping back inside. She stood there for a long time, letting the wind whip around her before finally going back in. Inside, the men stirred. It was almost dawn. The sky outside the window was shifting, black to gray, gray to the faintest shade of blue. Morning was coming. Kate checked her tools again. Not because she had to, because she needed to. Every circuit tested, every cutter sharpened, every piece of her improvised arsenal laid out like an extension of herself. Tommy passed her a battered headset. For you, modified. Range isn't great, but enough to keep you on our net. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his. A jolt of something, fear, hope, maybe both, ran through her chest. Then Frank's voice cut across the room. Gear up, we move in 30. The men rose. The ritual began, straps tightened. Rifles checked one last time, radios synced. A dozen small actions that together meant commitment. Kate pulled on her vest, feeling its weight settle against her ribs. She clipped her tools to her belt, slipped the headset into place. And for the first time in 8 years, she felt the full armor of Kate Morrison settle back onto her bones. The mechanic was gone. The soldier was awake. The door opened. Morning spilled in, pale and merciless. The desert waited. Kate took one last breath inside the safe house, tasting dust and silence, carrying ghosts on her shoulders. Then she stepped out, her boots crunching on sand, following Frank, Tommy, and the rest of the team into the growing light. Tomorrow had become today, and there was no turning back. How do you move through a field built to kill you without looking like what you are? An intruder with a wrench and a plan. They threaded the high ground like ghosts. Moonlight cut the rocks into silver knives. Kate led a small element away from the main formation, boots careful, breath measured. The plan was paper until it met the dirt and the wind, then it had to bend. That was her advantage. Paper folded, metal did not. Her fingers brushed the tools at her belt, the odd collection that felt more like a confession than equipment. A modified signal injector strapped to a ratchet, salvaged battery packs wired into a homemade transmitter, a selection of civilian relay parts wound with military-grade sealing tape. Soldiers moved with weapons. She moved like an electrician who had learned to be violent only when necessary. Tonight, violence would be clever. They approached the compound from a flank the surveillance had shown as least watched. Hawkins's geometry had been precise, predictable, and that predictability was a map. Positions, Frank whispered. The team melted into shadow. Tommy's eyes glowed through night optics as he fed comms into Kate's little transmitter, an improvised bridge between her tinkering and their doctrine. The first perimeter device sat where the heat maps predicted, a low berm stacked with stones, its apparent simplicity masking a festival of booby traps. Kate crouched and breathed. She let the technician in her do a slow inventory. Pressure plates disguised as mortar casings, a web of thin wire almost invisible against dusty earth, and electronics tucked into an oil can that had been hollowed and refitted. The artistry was clinical, Hawkins's signature. But the artistry had a flaw. The device relied on telemetry pulses synchronized to a local repeater. Cut the repeater's rhythm, you might make the device think the world had ended and leave it asleep. Kate smiled without humor. Tommy was on overwatch, feeding her a faint data pulse. 3 degrees of separation between that repeater and the main feed, he murmured through the headset. You want me to fake a blackout? Not a blackout, she said. A misdirection. Misdirection was theater's cousin. Hawkins' devices were theater for buyers. Kate made her tricks into a stage trick that ended with the curtain falling on the audience. She moved like a woman who had learned to be quiet by necessity. Her fingers worked a patch into the repeater housing, an adapter she'd crafted that rerouted the telemetry back through itself in a way that created a loop. The device would receive its own echo and interpret it as normal operation, while Kate fed it false environmental data, temperature and motion signatures copied from empty desert. For a moment, she felt ridiculous, feeding a bomb a lie like a child feeding a stray animal, but the mathematics of survival was rarely elegant. The loop took. The device's telemetry settled into a complacent rhythm. Kate exhaled slow. They passed the berm without the ground coughing fire. One less body counted against them. They moved deeper. The compound's defenses built like a labyrinth of purpose. Cameras hidden in the faces of jerry-rigged lanterns. Pressure-triggered devices under sacks of grain. Redundant fail-safes wired to secondary charges tucked into water tanks. Hawkins hadn't merely deployed explosives. She'd orchestrated them, each piece part of a composition designed to hum in harmony when played by an enemy's predictable notes. Kate listened for discord. At a culvert under a service road, the team stopped. Thermal imaging had shown a cluster of devices arranged in concentric arcs around a utility pole. Frank gave a look. We can't breach here. Too many variables. The standard options were blunt instruments: breach, detonate, retreat. None were clean. Kate crouched and traced the pole with gloved fingers. The pole fed local power to the compound, and through it ran the signals Hawkins used to coordinate sequential arming. We don't go head-on, she said. We turn the pole into the problem. Explain, Frank said. She drew a breath and shared the odd logic that had lived inside her for 8 years in Pine Ridge. If the control logic assumed normal supply, then a slightly altered impedance could change timing. If the timing shifted, sequencing would desynchronize and fail-safe loops would trigger safe modes. In short, make the system nervous, and it botches its own choreography. Tommy grinned, that old electric ghost grin. You want to play plumber with their grid, he said. Of course you do. They allowed her to work. Under the pole's cover, she removed a junction box with the care of someone taking apart a heart. Wires crisscrossed like veins, a mix of military-grade cabling and civilian supply lines. She peeled back insulation, threaded in a damped capacitor, a resistor cobbled from a radio, and a small motor lowering a mechanical shutter over a sensor. Nothing violent, everything surgical. She didn't want explosions, she wanted hesitation. The next sequence of devices twitched when their scheduled arming failed to sync. Red lights blinked, timers reset. An audible click meant a fail-safe engaged. The compound did not erupt. It hiccuped. The team moved through the stutter like a surgeon through the human body when the heart skipped. Each protected corridor they crossed felt like theft, stealing time from a machine that had been built to kill them. Every success chipped away at something heavier than metal, the certainty that her exile had been cowardice. With each trick that worked, Kate felt something unlatching inside her chest. It was not joy. Joy felt like hubris. It was the small, dangerous relief of competence resurfacing, like a muscle rediscovered after long disuse. They reached the inner ring before dawn. Hawkins's compound looked less like a fortress and more like a workshop. Tables strewn with components, schematic boards pinned on walls, men who were technicians more than soldiers. Buyers were tuning in, but tonight they watched only cold screens. Kate's infiltration had not been silent diplomacy. It had been surgical. She pivoted to the heart of the plan. Hawkins had built a control hub, a cramped structure of concrete and satellite dishes, wired like a nervous system to the field. If Kate could access it, she could feed the demonstration live to those watching, and then show them every corrupt transaction, every technical document, every client name. That was phase 2 of her revenge, exposure, not just elimination. Tommy crawled across the rooftop like a spider, cutting a satellite feed with practiced precision. He handed her a fiber optic spool. "You really want to light this up?" he asked. She nodded. "We broadcast. We don't just destroy the hardware. We send the receipts to every counterterrorism agency that will take them. We make Hawkins famous in the worst possible way." Frank's voice came soft over the net. "Extraction routes are ready, Kurdish teams on standby, but once you open that door, the compound will know. We'll have 60 seconds of grace at best." Kate swallowed. 60 seconds. A thin window. She felt the old calculation slide into place. How fast to move, which wires to touch, where to leave breadcrumbs for later investigators. This wasn't the crude urgency of field surgery. It was choreography, the kind she'd learned in training when she had to decide whose life to prioritize in a fallen building with 10 seconds of oxygen left. She breached the control hub through a side vent like a cat. Inside, Hawkins's system sat like an altar. Racks of servers, a main console, a series of patched-in consumer electronics that hedged military-grade hardware with off-the-shelf components. Hawkins's trademark, authoritative engineering dressed in common parts. Kate's hands felt at home among it. She didn't name the pieces. Names blurred. She moved on instinct. She set up an uploader, a device that would siphon the console's data and push it via relays to intelligence endpoints Tommy had preceded. The upload began. The screens outside her window, buyers watching, began to receive live feeds, schematics, bank records, video clips of hands assembling devices, signatures of transactions into offshore accounts. Kate watched monitors scroll and felt nothing at first. Then she saw the shift in the compound, men looking up, confusion turning to alarm. Hawkins's voice crackled, demanding status. The system she had manipulated began to unravel in public. Tommy's voice was a thread in her ear, taut with urgency. "Upload 50%, we need more time." She worked faster, hands moving in a blur, fingers cutting, whipping, soldering. The uploader spat confirmation. "Packet sent, received." Tommy fed her nods through cramped text bursts. The compound's alarms flared. Men ran like the curtain had fallen and someone had lit the set on fire. Outside, Frank's rifle barked. Doors opened. Shadowed figures converged. The choreography ended. Chaos began. Kate felt the familiar wash. The adrenaline, the sharpened focus, the ugly, necessary calm. They had forced Hawkins's theater into a crucible where heat burned the lies away. But the crucible demanded payment. They were detected, not because of carelessness, because they had chosen to be seen to expose. The compound's inner circle moved like animals dragged from sleep. The team fought not with the clean ease of drills, but with the messy improvisation of reality. They moved as one, covering, suppressing, creating paths to get the evidence out and the people away. A blast rocked the outer wall. Concrete dust filled the air like a memory. Kate's ear rang. Somewhere down a corridor, Tommy yelled. She turned and found him slamming a server rack into a transport case, his face a knife. A man lunged. Kate met him with the blunt edge of the ratchet she always kept for stubborn bolts. The world narrowed to bone and metal and the precise application of force. 40 seconds left. 30. Kate shoved the uploader into a SATCOM uplink as it warmed like a living animal. "Now," she screamed into the headset. Tommy closed the loop and the world opened. Packets streamed to agencies, to investigators, to people who had the power to turn this one night into a rolling avalanche. The buyers received the receipts mid-demonstration. The compound's live feed turned from showcase to indictment. They ran. Outside the compound, as sirens approached from multiple directions, not just their Kurdish allies but vehicles with official markings, Kate felt the odd, brittle satisfaction of a plan that had held. Hawkins hadn't vanished into a smoke screen. She had chosen to stay, to face what she'd built, and the consequences caught her. When the dust settled and the evidence was in official hands, Kate didn't feel triumphant so much as emptied. The math Hawkins had trusted had been used against her, and the result was inevitable. But empty didn't mean healed. It meant work remained. Mourning never finished because justice arrived. They moved into the night, not as victors so much as survivors who had chosen to stop pretending the world could be left clean without effort. Kate's hands were greasy again, not with oil this time, but with the residue of devices she had dismantled and the fingerprints of a life she had rejoined. She thought of Pine Ridge and the quiet of the garage, of Mrs. Henderson's Ford waiting for brake pads. She held a fragment of memory like a coin, small, solid, a reminder that some parts of her life were still fixable. And as they put distance between themselves and the compound, the uplink confirmations ticked in. Names captured, transactions frozen, demonstrative feeds intercepted and archived. The storm had been met. The aftermath would take years. But for now, in the dim belly of their transport, Kate let herself breathe once, long and raw. Her hands didn't stop shaking. They never would stop completely. She had disarmed a machine and exposed a web, but she had not disarmed the part of her that kept watch in the dark. A voice in her ear, Tommy, quieter now, said, "You did it." She closed her eyes. The truth was small and sharp. "We did it," she corrected. Outside, the desert rolled on indifferent and endless. Inside, she listened to the low hum of the transport and understood something again. There are fights that leave you hollowed, and there are repairs you must make yourself to become whole enough to keep going. They were moving back toward safety, toward interrogation rooms and slow, bureaucratic justice. But the night had taught her something dangerous and necessary. Predictability kills. Creativity saves. And sometimes the tools you think belong to a quieter life are the ones that define how loudly you survive. Why did victory feel so much like failure? The compound burned behind them. Not a roaring inferno, not yet, but flames licked the walls where charges had ignited fuel drums. Smoke drifted into the night sky like a signal flare announcing both triumph and vulnerability. Vehicles were pulling out, engines coughing in protest as they forced their way through uneven terrain. In the back of one truck, Kate sat wedged between Tommy and Danny Walsh, the youngest of the Berets. Her hands trembled against her knees, raw from the ratchet she'd used as a weapon. She couldn't stop staring at them, covered in dust and streaks of someone else's blood. Her tools felt heavier now than rifles ever had. The others said little. Men didn't speak much after chaos. They just sat with it, breathing, processing, watching the road. Frank rode shotgun in the lead truck, shoulders squared, eyes scanning horizon lines for ambushes. Tommy broke the silence, his voice rough. "Evidence is secure. Upload confirmed. We hit her hard." Kate's throat closed. He said it like they'd won. Like this was the end, but she knew better. The data would spread, yes. Hawkins's reputation was ruined. Buyers would scatter. But a woman like Hawkins didn't fold after exposure. She adapted. She had survived betrayal before. She had built an empire in the shadows. You don't build something that intricate without contingency plans. "She's still alive," Kate whispered. Tommy turned. His eyes caught hers. "Kate." "No," she said, sharper this time. "I saw the feeds. I saw her face in the control hub before I cut the uplink. She was in another room. She wasn't captured. She wasn't killed." The truck jolted over a rut. The men steadied themselves. Walsh muttered, "So what? You think she's out there rebuilding already?" Kate didn't answer. She didn't have to. They all knew. War never ends neatly. You don't kill a serpent by wounding the tail. The safe house came back into view just as dawn broke. Pale light bled across the desert, exposing every scar of the night before. The team filed out of the trucks with the exhaustion of men who had outpaced death but not outdistanced it. Radios hummed. Kurds on the ground coordinated recovery operations. American command was demanding reports. Kate walked past all of it. Her legs carried her back to the stone wall she had leaned against the night before, where the stars had seemed sharp enough to cut. Now, the sky was dull and wide. Her chest felt hollow. Tommy followed her, boots crunching. He stopped a few feet away, not crowding. "You did what you came to do," he said. She shook her head. "No, I lit a match." She's still breathing. "Maybe that's enough." Kate looked at him. "Would it be enough for you, Tommy? After 8 years in the dark, would you really call this enough?" He didn't answer right away. His face carried the same shadow she felt inside her. Finally, he said, "No, but sometimes survival is all we get." Survival, the word landed heavy. She had survived before, crawled out of rubble, woke up alone. Survival had never been enough then. Why would it be now? Later in the makeshift operations room, Frank gathered them. His tone was sharp, decisive. "Washington's ecstatic. We exposed a traitor, disrupted international buyers, and delivered proof they couldn't touch for years. They're already prepping press statements." Kate flinched. Press statements. As if Maria, David, and Emma could be summed up in a press release. Frank looked at her. "They want you back, Kate, not just for this op. They want you in D.C. debriefing, consulting, teaching new EOD teams how to think like Hawkins, how to beat people like her." Kate felt her chest tighten. A part of her, the soldier part, recognized the honor. But the woman who had buried herself in Pine Ridge recoiled. D.C. meant hallways with ghosts at every turn. It meant faces of politicians trying to package pain into policy. "I'm not a teacher," she said. Tommy from the corner spoke softly. "You already are." The room went quiet. She felt the weight of their eyes again, different this time, not skeptical, expectant. She excused herself before anyone could push further. Outside, the desert was already heating, sunlight burning away shadows. She walked until the safe house shrank behind her, until the voices of soldiers were swallowed by distance. Only then did she let her knees give out, dropping into the sand. Her breath came ragged. She pressed her palms into the dirt. Her scar throbbed in the heat. And for the first time since the night of the explosion, she let the tears come. Not silent ones, not restrained. Full sobs ripping through her chest until the desert blurred in front of her. She had carried it too long. The guilt, the blame, the illusion that burying Kate Morrison in a mechanic's garage would silence the ghosts. But they were still here, and Hawkins was still out there. The tears slowed eventually, leaving only the hollow quiet of exhaustion. She lay back against the sand, staring at the sky, whispering to faces that weren't there. I tried to make it mean something." A shadow crossed her vision. Tommy stood above her, not speaking, just waiting. He didn't offer a hand at first. He just let her see him, alive, still here. Finally, he crouched. "You don't have to finish it alone, Kate, not this time." She looked at him, searching for doubt, but his face was steady. He had carried the same ghosts, and he was still standing. Maybe together the ghosts weighed less. The sun climbed higher. Orders crackled back at the safe house. The mission had ended on paper, but Kate knew the truth. The mission was only shifting shape. Hawkins wasn't finished, and neither was she. She pushed herself up, wiping sand from her palms. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Then we find her." Tommy gave a single nod. "We find her." For the first time since she picked up the phone in Pine Ridge, Kate felt something close to direction. Not peace, not closure, but purpose. The desert wind rose again, carrying heat and dust. Kate stood in it, scar burning, ghosts at her back, Tommy at her side. The next battle wasn't scheduled yet, but she was already walking toward it. Why did Washington feel more suffocating than the desert? Kate stepped off the transport plane and the air hit her, humid, heavy, smelling faintly of jet fuel and power. D.C. always smelled like power. Men in suits waited at the hangar's edge, clipboards in hand, voices already rehearsed. They weren't soldiers. They weren't survivors. They were administrators of war. The ride into the city blurred by, convoys through congested streets, tinted windows that turned monuments into shadows. Kate sat in the back seat beside Tommy, who leaned against the door, watching everything with a soldier's suspicion. Neither spoke much. Silence was safer than words that could be twisted into sound bites. The Pentagon loomed like a fortress. She had walked its halls once as a young sergeant, wide-eyed, respectful. Now every step echoed with ghosts. The fluorescent lights buzzed too loud. The polished floors reflected too much. She wanted to turn around, but the escorts kept moving. Inside a conference room, flags stood rigid behind a table where men and women in suits waited. Generals in starched uniforms, officials with practiced smiles. Their eyes lit up when she entered, as if she were both exhibit and weapon. Frank introduced her, but she barely heard the words. Hero, survivor, the woman who broke Hawkins's network. The words stuck in her throat like glass. Hero. The real heroes were buried. Maria, David, Emma, names they would never say in this room. They asked questions. How had she disarmed the systems? What weaknesses had she seen? Could her methods be standardized, replicated? They wanted her knowledge boiled down to bullet points. She gave them answers stripped of emotion, facts, tactics, the skeleton without the blood. But when one official leaned forward and asked, "And how did it feel, Sergeant Morrison, to face the very mentor who betrayed you?" her composure cracked. Her jaw clenched. She stared at the table. "It felt like betrayal," she said flatly. "Because that's what it was. Don't dress it in psychology. Don't try to package it. She sold us out for money, and I buried my team because of her." The room went still. No one met her eyes, not even the general who had nodded approvingly minutes earlier. Tommy shifted in his seat, his hand brushing hers under the table, a small anchor in a sea of polished silence. Afterward, reporters cornered her outside, cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. "What was it like? What's next for you? How does it feel to be America's hero mechanic?" She kept her head down. "I'm no hero," she muttered, but the words didn't matter. They would spin her anyway. Headlines would print myths. The woman with grease on her hands who came back from exile to save the Green Berets. The story was too good to resist. In the hotel room that night, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city skyline. Tommy sat across the room, boots off, rubbing the scar on his cheek. "They don't get it," Kate whispered. "They never will," he said. Her hands curled into fists. "They think it's over. They think exposing Hawkins is enough, but she's still out there. Every day she breathes, more people die." Tommy leaned forward. "Then we don't let them close the book. We write the next chapter ourselves." She looked at him. His face was tired but steady, his voice carrying a quiet certainty she needed. For years she'd been alone in her guilt. Now she was. Still, the weight pressed on her chest. In the silence, she asked the question she had avoided since Pine Ridge. "Tommy, why us? Why did we survive when the others did?" His eyes darkened. "I've asked myself that every day. Sometimes I think it was chance. Sometimes I think it was punishment. Maybe survival isn't luck, it's assignment. Maybe we're here because we're not finished yet." His words sank deep. Not luck, not punishment, assignment. Kate lay awake long after Tommy's breathing slowed. DC glowed outside, indifferent and restless. She thought of Pine Ridge, of quiet mornings in the garage, of Mrs. Henderson's Ford waiting unfinished. She thought of Maria's laughter, Emma's humming, David's calm. And she thought of Hawkins, her voice on the uplink, cold and alive. The ghosts weren't gone, they weren't even quieter. But for the first time they didn't press her down, they pulled her forward. She whispered to them in the dark, "I'm not finished yet." The next morning the brass offered her a desk, a contract, consulting work in a secured building with a badge and clearance and coffee breaks. She almost laughed. A desk, as if you could take the desert out of her bones and replace it with paperwork. She declined politely, firmly. Frank found her after the meeting. His face carried no surprise. "You're going after her." Kate didn't answer. She didn't need to. He nodded. Then you'll need more than tools. You'll need people who believe. Choose wisely. As she and Tommy left the building, sunlight hit the river, blinding and sharp. The city behind them pulsed with politics, but their path cut elsewhere, into shadows, into pursuit. Kate adjusted the strap on her bag, feeling the weight of tools she had carried across worlds. Wrenches, wires, circuits, small things turned into lifelines. They were hers. They were enough. Tommy walked beside her, steady, unspoken loyalty in every step. Washington could write its press statements. The newspapers could call her hero. But Kate Morrison knew the truth. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the hinge. And somewhere beyond the monuments and lights, Patricia Hawkins was already moving her next piece across the board. Kate's jaw tightened. She was done reacting. Now she would hunt. Why did betrayal always wear a familiar face? The warehouse was quiet except for the rain ticking against rusted metal sheets. Kate moved slowly, boots on damp concrete, Tommy at her side. Their intel had been solid. Hawkins was here, stripped of her network, cornered but not broken. The city outside hummed with civilian life, neon signs, traffic. But inside, time felt narrowed, focused, waiting. They found her in the center of the floor. Patricia Hawkins, older now, her hair streaked with gray but her posture still sharp, commanding. A laptop open on the table beside her, stacks of papers sealed in waterproof folders. She didn't look surprised to see them. Her eyes slid over Tommy before settling on Kate. I was wondering how long it would take. Kate's jaw clenched. You left us to die. Hawkins tilted her head. I gave you a choice. You just weren't smart enough to see it. Every war is an economy. Some of us learned to trade better. Tommy bristled, fists tight. Kate raised a hand to steady him. She didn't take her eyes off Hawkins. You sold out your own soldiers. You used our training, our trust to build an empire on corpses. That's not economy. That's rot. Hawkins smiled faintly. And yet here you are, alive because I taught you. You can pretend it's hatred, but I see it for what it is, survival. You survived because you were mine. The words hit like shrapnel. For a moment, Kate felt the scar on her jawline burn, but then she breathed steady. No, I survived in spite of you. The silence between them was knife-sharp. Rain hammered harder on the roof. Hawkins leaned against the table, her voice calm, almost maternal. You think you've won because you uploaded files, because some bureaucrats in D.C. are celebrating, but files can be buried. Money moves quietly. I still have buyers' contacts. You've wounded me, Catherine, but wounds heal. Kate stepped closer, her tools heavy at her belt, though she didn't reach for them. Then this isn't about wounding. It's about stopping. For a flicker of a second, Hawkins's mask slipped. The calm cracked, revealing steel beneath. She straightened. Do you think killing me redeems you? Do you think it brings back Maria, Emma, David? Kate's breath caught. She hadn't said their names aloud in months. Hearing them from Hawkins's mouth was a desecration. Her hands shook, but not from fear, from fury barely leashed. Tommy shifted behind her, his voice low. Kate. She closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself. The ghosts pressed close, but not as chains now, as witnesses. When she opened her eyes again, her voice was steady. This isn't about redemption. This is about dignity. She moved faster than Hawkins expected. Not with a rifle, not with an explosive, with her hands. She ripped the laptop cable from its socket, snapping the drive free, shoving it into her pocket. The empire Hawkins clung to reduced to scraps in seconds. Hawkins lunged for a pistol hidden under papers. Tommy was there, weapon raised, but Kate's voice cut through. No. Tommy froze. Kate locked eyes with Hawkins, whose hand trembled around the gun. Not fear. Rage. Do it, Hawkins hissed. You think you're better than me? Then pull the trigger and prove it. Kate didn't move. The rain hammered, the silence stretched. Then she stepped forward, slow, deliberate, until the barrel pressed against her chest. She didn't flinch. I don't need to prove anything, she whispered. You already lost. The weight of those words broke something invisible. Hawkins's hand faltered. Her eyes flicked, searching, desperate for control she no longer held. For the first time, the teacher looked small. Tommy surged forward, ripping the pistol from her grasp. Hawkins didn't fight. She just stared at Kate, her lips trembling with a whisper only Kate could hear. "You should have been me." Kate held her gaze. "No, I should have been me." And in that moment, the war between them ended. Not with a bullet, not with an explosion. With Hawkins in cuffs, dragged away by forces who had arrived quietly, shadow agents who had followed Kate's trail. The system would handle the trial, the headlines, the punishment. Kate stepped back, her body trembling as adrenaline drained. She looked at Tommy, who exhaled deeply, shoulders sagging. "It's done," he said softly. But Kate shook her head. "It's never done, but it's enough for now." They walked out into the rain. It soaked her scar, her clothes, washing dust from her hands. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was carrying the garage mechanic's disguise or the bomb technician's armor. She just felt present. The ghosts were still there, Maria, Emma, David, but they weren't chains anymore. They were voices carried in the rain. She whispered to them, barely audible. "I kept my promise." Tommy glanced at her. "What did you say?" She managed a faint smile. "Just talking to friends." They reached the street, neon lights reflecting in puddles, the city alive with people who had no idea what battles had just ended inside a forgotten warehouse. Kate breathed in the wet air, letting it fill her lungs. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.